Welcome to the latest edition of Lexington Remembers, and particularly our special series in commemoration of the end of World War II, our series of conversations with Lexington veterans of that war. My name is Dan Fenn, and I'm delighted to join my old friend Sam Berman, who's our well, we're going to do this together. It's not going to be so much of an interview as it is a kind of discussion and conversation. And he's going to talk about his experiences during the war. I'm going to talk about mine, which were very undramatic and unheroic, and then reflect a little bit on how we feel about that experience so many years later. Sam is older than I am.
I like to talk to young people, though.
That's true. That's true.
I think Dan's
When's your birthday?
the 26th of February.
You see, I mean, a lot older, because mine's the 27th of March. So
I'm at least 10 days older than this man.
yeah, exactly. So, Sam, let's start off with yours. When did you go on active duty?
Well, in 1943, I was at the University of Wisconsin, and the war had started. We watched the President Roosevelt talk about the bombing of Pearl Harbor, and I was very political in those days. Being at the University of Wisconsin was, you had to be. And I volunteered. I volunteered to go into the Air Force. I thought I would be a pilot, but I wasn't because my vision didn't come up. So I wound up doing everything else on a plane. I was a gunner, a radio operator, a bombardier, a navigator, and if they gave me a broom, I'd sweep it up too.
And where were you flying from?
Well, after the training in the United States, I was assigned to the 12th Air Force, flying out of Corsica, and we were flying bombing missions over Vichy, France, first, and then over northern Italy.
What were you flying, the Mitchells or the
B-25 Mitchells, yes.
Yeah, right. Not the 17s or the 24s.
No, these were the two-engine.
Yeah, right.
And I actually wound up in Corsica, and I flew on 70 bombing missions.
70?
70, out of Corsica and later out of Rimini and on the Adriatic coast of Italy.
Now, how come 70? Because the 24s, I've forgotten, we'll get to that, B-24s, but I don't think they had to fly 70. I think it was 50.
It was the B-17s out of England, but they were flying in much more dangerous flights over Germany, and they lost a lot of people.
Yeah, and B-24s out of Italy, which was where I was. That was bad stuff too.
Right. Well, we flew when we first started flying. We encountered some German anti-aircraft, but not the anti-aircraft, the fighters. But shortly after I started my missions in 1943, they didn't have the gas to get up there, so our biggest danger was the anti-aircraft, which was plenty dangerous.
Yeah.
And we were supposed to fly 50 missions, and they didn't have the crews to fill out, so they raised our ante to 60, and those people who were started getting too nervous, they sent home. But those of us who stayed there, they had us fly 70 missions in order to be, because they needed the personnel.
70 missions. So when did you come home then?
I came home in 1945, and I was on a boat returning to the United States when the war ended in Europe.
And when did you get discharged?
As soon as they had a point system,
Yeah.
and it depended on what medals you had been awarded, and how many years you'd served, and how many months, and how many combat missions you'd flown. And I had enough to qualify for getting out. And they asked me, did I want to stay in the reserve? And I said, what is all the way out? I'll take that.
Yeah, yeah.
And then I went back to the University of Wisconsin. But
So when were you discharged?
it was in May of 1945.
May.
Yes.
I see. So you went home and were discharged.
Yes, I was. I had two brothers. One was in the infantry, and he had been wounded in the Philippines, or in Okinawa, I think it was. And I had another brother who was sailing in the merchant marine, and all of us seemed to get home about the same time.
Yeah.
My brother in the infantry had a bullet through his motor nerve in his arm, so he had about a year of surgery before he could
Get home. So you were sometimes a bombardier and sometimes a navigator.
Yes. Well, the Bombardier and the Navigator were the same person on the B-25.
I see.
So if you're going to be a Bombardier, I wasn't really a navigator, but they gave us the charts and taught us contact navigation.
Yeah.
I couldn't read the stars or the...
Yeah, I see. And you had gunners on the 25s?
Yes, we had a tail gunner, and we had a flight engineer who had a turret behind the pilots, and the radio operator had the side guns. So everybody was a gunner except the pilots. Even the nose, we had a gun even in the nose for the Bombardier Navigator.
And how long when did you leave Corsica?
It was in May of 45, I believe.
Oh, you were in Corsica. I thought you said you went from Corsica to
the United States, but it was all that month. And then when we got back, when we got home, I went through a system where they qualified me for getting out. So I was discharged there.
Corsica, how many bases did we have on Corsica?
We had three. We had three bases. Each one was a group under the 12th Air Force.
Yeah.
And I think mine was the 321st Bombardment Group. And when we first went up, I have to say, when I read Catch-22, I thought they were talking about me, because the first flight that I went up, we started circling, and we would circle around Corsica as we formed our formations for the bomb group.
Yeah.
And we circled around, and I didn't know what we were doing, but all of a sudden I saw military installations below me, and I said to the pilot, I see some military installations, should I strafe it? And he said, no, for God's sakes, that's our own.
That would have been awkward.
It would not have been a good idea.
Yeah, right. And so in Corsica, were you in tents or were you in barracks?
We were in tents, but we built structures.
Yeah, right.
The bombs came in boxes, wooden boxes that had tongue and groove boxes, and we used those for flooring. And we had very nice tight flooring and a structure for the tent to go over. And it was very comfortable. We had little pot-belly stoves.
Yeah, right. That all sounds familiar. And how many missions would you fly in a week, Sam?
Well, sometimes we would fly 2 or 3 the same week.
Yeah.
We weren't always assigned. I was assigned to a flight to one particular airplane until I started flying as Bombardier, and then they shifted me from wherever they needed somebody. So I was never flying with the same crew. And we did get anti-aircraft over France. And when you'd see a puff of black smoke, you knew that something was exploding near you. And if you saw a red center to it, it was too close.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
and on one particular flight over Stiglia in the Po Valley, all of a sudden there was an explosion beside our plane, and it was like a sheet of red. It wasn't just a red center.
Yeah.
And our plane was, I don't know how many holes that were. We had, out of the 6 people on that flight, we had 3 Purple Hearts.
Oh,
I was never that.
yeah.
But
So what medals did you have?
well, I won the Air Medal 7
Right.
times, and the Distinguished Flying Cross
You got the DFC?
once. Yes,
Yeah.
that was.
And that was for a particular mission, the DFC?
Yeah, that was that flight that I mentioned over Stiglia. Our plane was disabled. We had one of our engines was out, and I was up in the nose, and our plane was diving toward the ground, and that didn't look too good to me, so I decided I better bail out of this plane. So I went to the hatch right behind the pilots, and I had my hand on the hatch to pull it to open the door and get out. When I thought, gee, nobody else is going, I better check and see what the pilots, who were right behind me, and I looked at them. Something had hit the plexiglass front, and it didn't break the glass, but the tiny shards had cut their faces to the point where it looked like they were a totally bloody mess. I don't think they were very seriously hurt, but they were stunned. And the plane was diving, and I shook the co-pilot, and I pointed to the ground. We couldn't talk. The noise of the plane was too loud. And I pointed to the ground, and we were diving, and he tested the controls, and the planes responded. And so he shook the pilot, and then they asked me to give them a heading back to Corsica, because now we were no longer part of our formation. So I wasn't too good at this yet, but I took my charts out and I said, well, fly in this direction. And we got near the coast. They knew that there were anti-aircraft installations, so they said, is it safe to get out here? And I looked at my chart and I said, I don't think so. So they said, what should we do? So I said, head north. And if we went far north, we would have been in Switzerland, but we didn't have that good luck. So at some point, they said, how is it now? And I looked at my charts and I said, I think we're okay.
Yeah.
If you want to heading back to Corsica, I can do that. So they said, no, they could figure out how to go back to Corsica.
So no wonder you got the DFC, because in the B-24s, the DFCs went to the pilots, but usually not to anybody else on the crew.
Yeah, I was never an officer. I was a staff sergeant, I guess.
You were a staff sergeant?
Yeah.
Really? As the Bombardier and Navigator, you were a staff sergeant?
Yes, but I wasn't trained in the States. I was trained in combat.
I see. I see. So the pilot was a captain, or was he a first lieutenant?
Well, he could be either, I think.
Yeah. And the co-pilot would have been...
Lieutenant.
Yeah. Right. Right.
And
Because it's a little different on the B-24s. Well, your story is so much different from mine. I think I read somewhere, Sam, that about a third, maybe, of the people who were in the services during the war were in combat, as you were. I talked with Bob Edwards recently in the first of the series, and he spent the war in Cambridge working on radar. As President Kennedy said in a press conference one time, and some people go overseas, some people never leave the United States in a war. That was that famous quote, life is unfair in many ways, he said. We can all subscribe to that notion. My entry into the service was different, a little different from yours. Well, different in significant ways. I was at Harvard, as you were in Wisconsin, and they had various programs. I was kind of interested in the Navy program, but I couldn't get into any of those because of my eyes that had gone when I was 12 years old. So there was something called the Enlisted Reserve Corps, and you went off and volunteered right after Pearl Harbor. I joined the Enlisted Reserve Corps, and that was an arrangement where you got sworn in, and then when they needed you, they'd call you to active duty. It was sort of a passive response. I didn't wait till I was drafted, but I figured, okay, you guys, here I am when you're ready for me. So I was called up. We were all called up March 11, 1943. Went to Fort Devens, and much to my surprise, they said, since you enlisted, not the way you did, get right into it. I have to ask you why you did that. They said, which branch would you like? And for some reason, I didn't know I was going to get asked even. I said Army Air Corps. And then they said, what part? Well, I knew I couldn't fly because of the eyes, and I probably wouldn't have anyway. And as far as fixing planes are concerned, listen, I wasn't interested in that. I wasn't going to be any good at that. And I didn't know about the different parts of the Army Air Corps. So I said administration. Well, little did I know what that meant. But the long and short of it was that I went overseas on the SS John Jay out of Newport News, Hampton Roads, I guess, in Virginia. Month trip across the ocean with convoy and all that stuff, and ended up in a B-24 base in southeastern Italy, doing nothing immortal or heroic, or nobody gave me any medals, and I didn't deserve any medals. I was feeling very uncomfortable because most of my friends were officers and doing important stuff, you know. Our adjutant, who later became a judge in New York, said to me one day, Dan, he said, there's an opening for warrant officer in the Mediterranean Theater. Why don't you apply? So I took the exam, studied Army regulations. The only question I remember on the exam was, how many horses do you have at a corporal's funeral? Who cares? I got it right.
So how many horses does
I
it?
think it's 2. Yeah. It's not very many. There's none now. So anyway, I became a warrant officer, and I was sure the 2 things I didn't want to do was to be a supply officer, because I figured that was really boring, and I didn't want to be a motor pool officer, because I didn't care about cars, and the only thing I could drive was a Jeep. And so I gave my new commanding officer a crisp salute, because the B-24 bomb group didn't need a warrant officer, so they shipped me off to Mediterranean Air Transport Squadron. And so I saluted him crisply, and he said, "Good, you're our new supply and motor pool officer." So, oh my God. So that was in early May of 45. By that time, you were going home. I got home Halloween night in 1945, got discharged at Fort Devens in November of 45. Didn't get home from the time I went on active duty until I came home on Halloween night. You get leave before you went overseas?
I don't recall. I don't think I did.
They kept telling us we were going to get leave.
I don't remember that
We
I did.
never did.
Actually, when I went overseas, they did the way to get the planes over was to have the new crew fly them over.
Yeah.
And the B-25s couldn't cross the ocean just from the United States to Europe. So we flew from first to Florida, then to Natal, Brazil, and Belém, Brazil, on the big bulge in South America, over to the big bulge in Africa, and we landed on Ascension Island, which was halfway between.
Yes, Ascension Island.
And that way we took the
Yeah,
airplane.
that's the way I came home on a C-47.
Yeah.
7 days.
Yeah,
And if you missed Ascension Island is in the middle.
it's right
Right?
in the middle. Right in the middle.
And if you missed Ascension Island,
Forget it.
forget it. Forget it. So yeah, that's right. So you made the same route that I did, only I was coming home on it that
Yeah,
way.
well, I went overseas that way, and I came back on a boat.
You came back in a what? Liberty ship?
Yes.
Yeah. 5 tiers.
Yeah,
Bunks.
there were a lot of us
Yeah.
going home. It didn't matter. We'd do anything to get home.
Yeah, I'll never forget that trip over with the convoy. You had a convoy too. The war was still on.
You know, I didn't pay attention. That was the war was sort of winding down at that point.
Yeah,
I think that
they didn't. Yeah.
I don't think the ocean was as dangerous by that time.
Now, tell me something, Sam. Why did you enlist? You were in college. You could have stayed there for a while.
Well, there were 2 reasons, Dan. First of all, I knew what was happening to Jews in Europe, and being Jewish, I really felt that I wanted to participate. And secondly, I knew I was going to be drafted at some point, and like you, if I volunteered, I could choose my service.
Right.
And so in 1943, it was earlier, but in May is when I actually went in, because I went in May and came out in May. I was sent to Florida to, what was the name of that base? for the first training, which was, well, we actually were in a group that went to Centenary College first, and we were training in Piper Cubs as our first flying lessons, and it wasn't until after that that I had the eye exam that's the decision was made that I shouldn't be a pilot.
Yeah.
But we were already flying Piper Cubs.
So why did you want to fly?
Adventure, romance, I don't know. It was the
Off we go into the wild blue yonder.
right, just sort of that. You know, when you're 19 or 18 or 19 years old, war, it's a time that they get young men into the war because they don't know what they're doing anyway, and nobody thinks they can really get hurt. Others might, but you're not going to get hurt, and so I think war is fought by young men because they don't know any better.
You know, we got off the boat to John Jay in Naples in late January, after the four weeks crossing the ocean, and they put us in a place close to Naples, the Vomero, and it was a bombed-out boys' school until they shipped us to our permanent base in the southeastern part of Italy. And we didn't have cots or anything, we had those mattress bags. You remember those things? They were body bags in case anything happened to you. So everybody had one, and we had them stuffed with straw, and we're sleeping on the floor of the school. And there was a German air raid first night there, I think. And we were too stupid and had that exact feeling that you're talking about, nothing could happen to us. We didn't go to the shelter. We just stayed there.
Watch the fireworks.
I mean, why bother to go to the shelter? Yeah. Now, how long did it take you to get over that feeling?
Well, I didn't. I don't remember feeling worried about my own feeling in danger. I think there were others. I had other friends who did, who developed a fear. And some of those were sent home because they couldn't handle it psychologically anymore. But I never got over the fact that nothing was going to hurt me.
Yeah, you didn't.
No, I was.
But it must have been pretty scary up there with all that flak.
No, even then, when I was ready to bail out of the plane, we had training about bailing out and enough information about what it feels like that I had no fear of doing that. I felt that I knew exactly what would happen. And if you bailed out over Italy and you landed in the countryside, the partisans really controlled the countryside, and they would pick up any Allied forces that bailed out. If you landed near the Germans and they got you, became a prisoner of war. But I felt pretty secure that even if I bailed out, I probably would wind up with the partisans, and
Yeah.
they would get me back to my base.
Yeah.
But the chances are that it might not have happened. It might not have worked that way. It's just that I just felt
That you assumed it would.
I just felt comfortable that
Yeah.
I wasn't going to
That's
get hurt.
interesting. Yeah.
I was asked to speak at the Veterans Day program at Brookhaven, and one of the things I said that wars are decisions of wars are made by generals, by politicians, and by businessmen. The people that go into the wars don't make those choices,
Yeah.
and so that's why I think you have to be young, and the older people are the ones that send you, but the young people are the ones that fight it.
Yeah. We'll talk about that in a minute. So, what was it like for you coming back and becoming a civilian again?
Well, I just went back to school. I went back to the University of Wisconsin, and I had started out, I liked math and science, but I really didn't know much about it. So I thought, when I first went to Wisconsin, I thought I would go into engineering. And that really wasn't my thing. And I got so far, and then my family business was growing and needed help. So
In Wisconsin?
no, in the Boston area.
Oh, really?
So,
Well, why'd you go to Wisconsin if you brought up in Boston?
Well, my sister went there first, and so
Oh. Okay.
I just
Cold out there.
yeah, but it was a long way off, and it was more adventure than going to
Yeah.
a school in the Boston area.
Right. Okay. And so then you came back to Boston.
And I went back into the family business, which was a trucking company. But at that point, I was very interested in folk music, and I noticed an article offering guitar lessons, and I had a guitar, but I didn't know how to play it. And the guitar lessons were being given by Bess Lomax, who was part of the Almanac Singers.
Yeah.
And she and her husband had moved to Boston. He was a graphic designer, and so was my wife. And so we became friends, and I learned the guitar from her. And then we formed a group to reflect the group in New York that was being run by Pete Seeger, and they called themselves the People's Artists. So we called ourselves the People's Artists of Boston. And we started doing singing hootenannies, and
While you were in the trucking company.
yes, well,
Yeah.
that was not my main activity.
Yeah.
I was supporting myself in the trucking company.
Yeah.
But we did the hootenannies and square dances, and a lot of the times we were being hired by high school kids to run square dances, and we would sing during their dancing intermissions. We would sing folk songs, and at that point, the Progressive Party had formed with Henry Wallace running for
Yeah,
president.
sure, I remember that.
And we were sympathetic to that movement. And after that failed, Walter O'Brien ran as a Progressive Party candidate for mayor of Boston. It was sort of the last little fledgling of the Progressive Party in the Massachusetts area. And so Bess asked us to write songs for the soundtrack for Wally. And so we wrote a number of them, and my Jackie Steiner, who was my brother's girlfriend at the time, later she was my sister-in-law for a little while, and she basically took the idea of the ship that never returned and worked on the idea of Charlie on the MTA.
Yeah.
And she came back, and we all worked on those songs, and we did a sound recording. I was the lead singer for the soundtrack, the original, first version that was ever recorded of that song. And we changed it, we worked on it, and she called it the character Angus when we started. And we said, you can't do that. If he hasn't got a nickel, it's maybe because he's Scotch. We have to use a more general name. So we came up with Charlie. And actually, we used that song at our hootenannies, and we liked the song, so we kept doing it. And other people who were friends learned it from us. And eventually somebody sang it to a guy named, I think it was Tim Holt in New York, who was a folk singer, and he recorded it. And the song came back to Boston, and the Republicans, the right-wingers in town said, when they heard Walter O'Brien's name on the song, because the last verse said, vote for Walter A. O'Brien to fight the fare increase. And they said, you can't sing that communist song. So the song went down. But later, one of the people that we knew was working as a bartender in California at the Hungry Eye in San Francisco. And he taught the song to the Kingston Trio. And they recorded it, but they changed the name from Walter O'Brien to George as a fictitious name. And it became the #1 bestseller in the country. But none of us ever expected that to happen.
That's a great story, and you were the vocalist on the soundtrack.
I still have my original soundtrack record from that.
And so now we have the Charlie card
Right.
from that song.
Yeah, well, they got over the idea that Wally was a communist.
Yeah.
He wasn't, but
Yeah.
But in those days,
it's such a great story. It's such a great song. My goodness. And so you slid back into civilian life pretty easily.
Yes, the truth is, Dan, that I never stopped being a civilian.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
We were. That army was a civilian army, really. In a way, it had the military discipline up to a point, but a lot of parts of the army that was sort of ignored.
Well, I certainly had no interest in making a career of it. As a matter of fact, and I think it was a bad mistake, they said to me, would you like to join the reserves? And you mentioned that. And I said, hey, I've had all of this I want. My father was in Des Moines, Iowa in World War I, and he just, he hated being told what to do, and you know that someday I'm going to murder the bugler.
Right.
Someday they're going to find him dead. It wasn't a life for me either, and I just picked up where I'd left off, and finished college and went on, did other things. Here we are, Sam. A couple of old men, very old.
Very old.
When you get to be 97, that's pretty old, right? And Sam, you've done a lot of things around town. I've done a lot of things around town. You still involved in stuff. I'm still involved in stuff. 75, it's been 75 years since that thing was over. An encapsulated period of time, about the same amount of time for both of us, 2.5, 3 years. And just a break in our normal lives. We're in college, we're going along. And then all of a sudden, bang, we're in this strange situation, alien situation in many ways. Looking back all those years, what are your reflections about it? What are your reminiscences about? What do you think?
I think what was happening in Europe at that time called for our participation. We had to get in because Hitler and Mussolini were going to take over the world, really, and Hitler was well on his way, and he had to be stopped. So I think fighting that war was a necessity. We had to fight it. America had to get in to fight it. But I think generally wars are fought for political reasons or for not good reasons. And I'm really am suspicious of the reasons that we got into any war since World War II. That I think that we got into Vietnam on a false basis. Korea was a trumped-up base for getting into the war, and then we fought the little wars like the Panama Canal War, the Grenada War, in which we didn't get hurt, but some people did, and then we've gotten into all of these Gulf Wars. That it's just. I just question the value of any of these wars since World War II. There's something had to be done probably after the 9/11 destruction of in New York City, but we went into Iraq, which was also a false premise.
People who have been in combat, like you, people whose lives have been at risk, like yours, mine, not anywhere near so much. Even people like me, whose lives are interrupted, I don't know about you, but all we want to do is go home.
Yeah.
Just go home. Get back to our regular lives. But that's such a minor a minor factor when you think of the lives lost, when you think of the property destroyed and the beautiful places ravaged and the damage to great works of art, when you think of the cost, when you think of the refugees, I've often thought, we keep talking about these people who gave their lives. Sam, they didn't give their lives. Their lives were taken from them. It's a big difference. It's a big difference. And after all these years of life and living that you and I have done, you say, is it really worth it?
Well, part of my feeling about people thanking us for our service and Veterans Day and Memorial Day are sort of an advertisement for the military. We talk about the heroic things that happened, and young people think.
And there were some heroic things.
Oh yes, there certainly were, and it's a kind of a lure to get young people to get in, and they want to be heroes too.
Yeah.
And in the end, nobody's a hero.
Yeah. Yeah, is that why? I mean, you get caught when you're young. You get caught up with the music and the parades and I've felt very uncomfortable around Harvard Square not being in uniform. And I was looking forward to not being a civilian. I wasn't.
Yes.
I wasn't getting into it for any particularly noble reasons, although I felt exactly the same way you did, that this was a horrible thing that was going on in Europe and we had to do something about it. But the glamour is just show stuff, and the forcing people into the cold and the wet and the trenches and the flak and it's such a horrible price to pay. I had a friend, Adam Yarmolinsky, a college friend of mine. He was, as he proudly said, the deputy to the Secretary of Defense, Bob McNamara. McNamara was a great guy, in fact, very sensitive guy. And Adam, I ran into Adam shortly after he'd seen Apocalypse Now. And he was in a state of shock, Sam. And he said, if those of us way up the chain had any idea of what happens as a result of the decisions we make to real people in real places.
Right.
Why don't we? I mean, we've had enough experience with this. Why don't we say this is the last resort?
Well, we know that war is hell. That enough people have said so. Enough films and books have been written.
Movies, TV shows
that condemn the whole concept of war, but it doesn't stop wars.
Why? Why can't we learn? You know, here we are, looking back on that experience, and the thing that really stands out for me is, why can't we learn not to do this?
Yeah, I agree. We should, somehow everybody has to start from scratch and learn all over again. Each generation needs to have their own experience and learn.
My mother was a pacifist because she was German, and she was over here during World War II, and it was very painful for her because of the way she was treated being German by her friends. And she was a pacifist. I'm not a pacifist. I agree with you. Sometimes, like World War II, you just have to do it. Civil War, you just have to do it. That's all. And you and I just happened this greatest generation stuff. How do you feel about that?
Well, I'm kind of proud to be one of the greatest
Okay.
generations.
All right.
You know, I mentioned my brother, and my brother had started his first year at Harvard at the time, and that was when they had the program for officers training for,
Yes,
for
indeed.
young men that were in college,
Right.
and all of a sudden there was
Field
this
artillery, they went.
there was this revolt around the country. Why should those guys, the elite, become officers and the rest of us have to be in the infantry?
Yeah, yeah.
And so that's when they took all the young men out of the colleges and put them in the infantry.
Yeah.
And so that's how my brother wound up as an infantry soldier in the Pacific.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah, that was there was terrible stories in that. Something called the Army Specialized Training Program.
yeah, SPCA.
Remember that thing? I wanted to
SPCA.
get into that. They trained people to take over in Germany and Japan when as we expected, although we were never sure that we would win this thing. And the Battle of the Bulge, and they needed people, and they just scooped up all these people and stuck them in combat. They didn't know the front end of a rifle from the back, and there were terrible sacrifices there.
I had a friend who won the Distinguished Service Cross, which is the next medal below the Congressional Medal of Honor. It's just about as high as you can get. And he was in the infantry. He was in the tank division. And this was after the war. He told me that he was with a group that were in a barn, and 3 German tanks were coming at them, and they were almost certain to be killed. And he just went berserk. So he grabbed all the hand grenades he could, and he ran at them and threw the hand grenades into the tank tracks and into the tanks, and he stopped 3 tanks. He said he didn't do that out of heroism. He did it out of fear and out of hysteria. He was, but that's. Then he won the next highest medal you can get in this.
Yeah, Congressional Medal of Honor.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you know, our generation's done an awful lot, Sam. I mean, when I was in college, guess what? There wasn't any such thing as gays. Yeah, right? You know what I mean? And women, they were teachers or nurses, you know.
Right.
They weren't doctors and lawyers and things like that, right? And they were lynching people in the South, right? And Hitler was doing the horrible things in Europe that he was doing, right? And there was poverty. You know, our generation has done a lot of things and survived a lot of
Well,
things.
you know,
But this war thing,
when you stop and look at the war, first of all, it involved the entire population of this country one way or another. We weren't fighting the way we fight now with volunteers, where everybody was involved.
yeah, right.
And when that war was over, we had the GI Bill of Rights, and we created a generation of people, the intellectuals and scientists and writers that we don't see anymore.
Yeah.
And now, in order to get the education, is so expensive that a lot of people who might be
Right.
important in our culture never get a chance to go to college even because they can't afford it.
Right.
So that's why I think that there's something wrong with the system that says that in order to get an education you have to spend that much.
Well, that's right, and you know, our generation has really accomplished a lot, but there's an awful lot that we haven't accomplished, and new problems that have arisen. And this is one. When I went to Harvard, it cost $400 a year, and then a couple of hundred for room and board. So, but the very high on maybe the top of my list of things that our generation failed to accomplish was to change the paradigm so that people who have the power said, no, we're not going to do this war thing. We can figure out another way of dealing with this problem. So thank you very much. Great
It's a
to
pleasure.
talk to you.
Pleasure talking to you, Dan, my old friend.
Yeah. Well, I'm not as old as you are.
Well, someday you will be.
Okay. Thanks a lot, Sam.
Okay, thank you, Dan.